Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all have been enjoying our Women at the Top Summit as much as I have. My name is Taylor Nicole Rogers, and I am a correspondent for the FT in the United States. I have the immense honor of introducing this afternoon's keynote speaker, John Amici. John is a business psychologist and author who is going to be speaking with us about the Black Lives Matter movement and what it can teach us about our quest for gender equality. He will also be taking your questions at the end of this session, so please feel free to start dropping those in the question box in the corner of your screen right now. Without further ado, John Amici.
Thank you so much. I have a reputation, I think, of entering rooms and leaving them slightly smoldering. We'll see. I hope you're okay. The last 18 months have been incredibly difficult for all of us. One of my day jobs is I work in the NHS, and if that experience over the last 18 months has taught me anything, is that we have to give a damn about each other. We have to care about each other in a way that is more authentic and deep and meaningful than we have in the past. It is a lesson also learned by looking at the Black Lives Matter movement. The quest for equality cannot operate when we are strangers to each other. What does the Black Lives Matter movement teach us? And even if not, don't consider some kind of organization per se, but consider the momentum that has occurred in the last 18 months or so, less than that. Black Lives Matter, this movement, has taught minorities, women, Black people, queer people, people with disabilities, and anyone else different from some nebulous, acceptable normal that our death is our only superpower. That's what it teaches us. That in order for the world to pay attention to systemic and ongoing bias, prejudice, and inequality, lots of us have to die. Because people think it's just Sarah Everard, in the same way they think it's just George Floyd, but that's a convenient misrepresentation. In the case of George Floyd, his murder 512 days ago, 737,500 minutes ago, was the tip of the iceberg. His name, his body, lies piled upon the corpses of countless others. Tamir Rice, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, and Breonna Taylor, an emergency medical technician who was shot 8 times by the police while sleeping in her own bed. For her, the intersection of blackness with womanness means that her death, no matter how excruciatingly unjust, attracts a lot less attention. The list of Black men and women of every color, dead, wounded, undermined, underemployed, overlooked, and othered, is not just in the United States. It's here too. There is a pile of bodies, a trail of tears, a wealth of pain that makes up the very foundation of our society's supposed progress. In the UK, Black people make up 3% of the population and 8% of the deaths in police custody. The American origins of the Black Lives Matter movement have alerted us to the temptation to allow injustice elsewhere to overshadow injustice closer to home. Perhaps it's human nature to see wickedness committed from a distance and contrive to imagine innocence at home. What else has the Black Lives Matter movement taught us about the quest for equality? It's taught us that many still endorse the deficit model, where Black and ethnic minority colleagues, and indeed women en masse, are seen as intrinsically broken, missing some vital, intangible, unquantifiable quality that will always make white and male the right choice where power is concerned. The Black Lives Matter movement has taught us how interventions to address inequality go so radically wrong. We've seen how interventions to address systemic and individual racism and misogyny almost always operate by attempting to place the responsibility for change on the target of prejudice, not the perpetrator. Whether that be those acculturation and resilience strategies that are taught to rooms full of Black graduates, or assertiveness training for junior women, or, without a hint of irony, last month telling women afraid of police brutality to flag down a bus. My personal experience over the last 512 days has been that this movement has exposed that in our towns and our cities, in our workplaces, to many white people, Black people are strangers, an anathema, more caricature and stereotype than neighbor or colleague. We've learned that many people think meritocracy is an objective reality, rather than at best a contemporary aspiration, or even the satire that Michael Young described when he first wrote about it in 1958, using it at that time to describe the monarchy. We've learned that surprising attacks on equity for any individual identity group can be mustered not just by bigots, but by prominent people who represent those who also suffer inequity of their own. This cosmic whataboutery, baying at each other's throat, women against Black people, as if Black people can't be women and vice versa. This baying at each other's throats ensures that the vice grip of the status quo remains. The movement has taught us, perhaps the momentum waning has taught us, that the attention span of well-intended individuals is frighteningly short. That even the serial murder of Black people or women can't hold their attention for long. We've learned that people love the metaphor of the journey. I'm on a journey where it comes to inclusion. I'm on a journey where it comes to gender, forgetting that with any reasonable person, when we speak of a journey, we hold a specific destination in our mind, and at the very least, we imply expedience. Not one of us has ever been on a journey in a car, a bus, a train, or a plane and crossed our fingers, hoping it could just take 1 hour longer. It's 512 days since the murder of George Floyd, and some people still haven't arrived. Some people haven't left on their journey. The movement and its waning momentum has reinforced to me that the x-axis of history is being purposefully obscured from you. When I say the x-axis of history is obscured, what I mean is that people don't understand how long the struggle has been. Any of you who are stats nerds like me will recognize when you watch a graph on television, often where they've manipulated the axes. Of course, if you look at the last 10 years, the progress made for women, on behalf of women, by women, might seem large, but then you realize that it's 107 years since Emily Davison was killed by King George V's horse seeking the right to vote. It's 126 years since Oscar Wilde was thrown into jail for the crime of being gay. It's 18 years since the repeal of Section 28. 402 years since Black people first came to America, not necessarily of their own free will, and 187 years since the Slavery Abolition Act, which didn't end slavery, by the way. It's 1800 years since Black people first came to the United Kingdom with the Roman army. And it's 512 days since George Floyd was murdered. It's 512 days has reminded me that progress is the enemy of change and always has been. Progress is a steep slope on which people must cling precariously, always working to remain exactly where they are, cautious about striving forward lest they slip and all headway is lost. Progress is a way to ensure everyone is trapped in that endeavor, so focused on the promised equality that they are unable to thrive in everyday capacities like work and public life. Change is a step. It will take heroic work to bridge it, distance, and climb, but once cleared, one can rest, assured that on this level you can remain for at least a moment before you strive again. We need change in this world. We've learned from the Black Lives Matter movement that political leaders and media moguls will imagine a world so far removed from reality to explain away any malintent in the disproportionate inequality of society in which we live. I've not got long. This movement has taught me that while mindsets and learning are important, they're a powerful aspiration for each of us to have about people different than us. What we need to secure equity is behavior change. No black person in this room has been wounded by a racist thought. No woman wounded by a misogynist thought. No queer person wounded by a homophobic or transphobic thought. No person with a disability wounded by an ableist thought. We are wounded by what people say and do, and in our workplaces, we control that readily. So why not this? As is the case when all around can seem like despair, like a box has been opened and there is a whirlwind of darkness, if we look hard enough, there is still light. That light is not the children or the next generation. It's not time. It's you. Tell the world what you stand for. Tell anyone who will listen, colleagues, friends, neighbors, tell them what you stand for. Tell them you stand opposed to the incivilities of bias and prejudice. When you tell people what you stand for, you tell them what you won't stand for. And around you is a space that is clear for people to thrive. There is light in this darkness, and it's you. And it is effortful in the extreme. To maintain your enthusiasm as the interest wanes, to be eternally vigilant of the impact you have on the world, mindful of your privilege and power, to ensure that you are willing to endure the discomfort of courteously but clearly challenging even the smallest incivilities that occur around you, lest through your abdication you allow them to reproduce and grow, spreading like the rot from Chaucer's bad apple. You are disproportionately powerful, even if you don't know it. Each one of you is a giant to someone. Start there. In our life, in your work, we are taught that all our resources are finite. We have to steal from Peter to play Pauline. Dignity is not a finite resource. It is the one thing in this world that when we grant it to another, both parties get more. The question is, what will you learn from this? And what will you do next? I'm going to hand it over to questions.
Talk. I believe we are just about out of time, but I do want to squeeze in one question from our audience. Here it is. Sometimes it can feel like the narrative is that women's issues are over. How do we galvanize society to focus on diversity issues again when there are other huge issues such as racism and climate change?
None of these things are exclusionary. Issues for women, for poverty, for climate change, for racism, they aren't. There isn't a finite amount of dignity to apply to each of these options. We don't have to steal from women's issues in order to recognize inequity for race. We don't have to steal from race in order to recognize inequity for religious minorities. We cannot win this fight by looking at each other and hoping that only by stepping on the neck of someone less well considered can we rise. It's how we all fail.
Well, I think that is a wonderful note to end on. John, thank you so much for taking a few moments out of your day to share your wisdom and your expertise with us. I know I've learned a lot from everything that you've shared, and I hope our audience members have as well. Thank you again for attending this session, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit.